Hello, everyone. This is Kerwin, and welcome to another episode of Travel Talk. And in today's Travel Talk, we're going to talk about aviation safety. Let's go. So, there's been uh, a lot of talk about aviation safety in the last, what are we, March? Well, we're not March yet, we're still the end of February, but we've had a tumultuous, is that the right word? Tumultuous? Last 3 months, I'd say. Um, there has been there's been accidents not only within the United States. The ones you see in the United States, you see them all the time. You see it all the time because it's on TV, it's on internet. But there have been accidents in other countries as well. Um, and I say accidents because people have died, and so it makes sense that people are a little weary about air travel. But I must say, as others in the aviation industry have said, um, the aviation is one of the safest ways to travel, despite all the things that's going on at this moment. It is an extremely complex industry. Lots of people don't understand it, and when an airplane crashes and people die, it because the airplane carries more people than I mean, it's a mode of mass transportation. And so when something happens, it's very horrific, of course. One of the things, being in the industry, I understand a lot about it because I wore a farmer hat of being on the emergency response team, and I can assure you that the airlines all drill for this kind of thing. I remember the when I was working for previous airline, we had just done a drill. And what the drill does, it simulates everything except the actual accident or incident. And so there are procedures that we follow. You probably don't notice it, but usually whenever there's a airline accident, the airlines will pull the ads that they have. So you won't see any ads that say, go fly here, go fly there. If you see them, it's just the ones that are still in the pipeline, but they will pull them. And so for the next 2 days, usually you don't see any airline ads. Usually, that's what usually happens. That's part of the protocol. Your the problem we have today is that everyone is an expert. And so in anything, when anything happens, you see people pop up out of the woodwork. And we're in an era where no one wants to wait. So an accident happens like right now, they want to know, well, what happened? What happened? Oh, I have a video that shows this. Um, the fact that you have a video, you don't know what happened because you do not have the full um, picture, which is why in the United States it's the NTSB, which is the National Transportation Safety Board. And this group is responsible for investigating accidents. It's actually not just air, it's also road. Say if a car crashes or you know, a truck overturns or something like that, the NTSB is responsible for investigating those. Um, the issue that we have is that everybody wants everything immediately. And even before they pulled the wreckage and the bodies out of the water in Washington National, people were blaming others or blaming things for it. Aircraft accident investigation takes a long time. It's a meticulous science, but they usually get to the bottom of it. And when they figure it out, they issue directives. And the directors will say, hey, this is what happened based on our investigation. This is what led up to it. Because every time you see an accident, it is not just, oh, the aircraft crashed. There's a whole bunch of things that happen leads up to that, and that's what the investigation does. You hear them talk about the black box and the cockpit voice recorders. These are devices that record information in the cockpit, and it records what the systems in the airplanes are in the airplane is doing. So you may see an airplane land and then something happens, but there's a whole series of things that led up to that. And the instruments record all that information. So the safety boards, and in the US it's NTSB, but in other countries it's called something else. But there is something in every country that does that. The NTSB will actually help other countries because aviation is not just about one country. It is a system, it's a worldwide system, and everybody helps each other because the airplanes only come from a few manufacturers. The big ones are Boeing, Airbus, Embraer, Bombardier, and I think those are probably the bigger ones. And there, I think there's also a company in China, but the ones that are operating, the largest ones are typical of the big three, which is Embraer, Boeing, and Airbus. Um, Bombardier to a lesser extent because Bombardier do make a lot of the like the CRJ 700. Bombardier makes it as a Canadian-based company. The Airbus A220 was actually made by Bombardier, um, but Airbus bought it. So there's a lot of intermingling within the aviation industry. Um, what has happened is, and don't think that aviation safety is not being considered all the time. Uh, when they build airplanes, they look at what happened to the older airplanes that broke when they crashed, and they design the new airplane to break in different places. So it facilitates people getting out of the airplane easier in that case. I read somewhere that, and it's from a trusted source, that the CRJ 700 that crashed in Toronto and ended up flipping upside down is actually designed so that the wing comes off. Because usually that is where the fuel is in the wing. And so a lot of people were able to get out of the plane, one because the fire people who was at the airport, they reacted very quickly. Now, these airports do a lot of drills. So when I say that there are things that happen in the background that you don't know about, they do drills and they practice. Every time you go to an airport, if you look closely, you probably don't care. But if you look closely, you will go by a fire station on your way out to the runway. And those firemen train, our fire personnel train 24/7 to make sure that if something happens, they can take care of you. Um, they usually have, I know here in Houston, and you can see it in some airports, they have an airplane and it's an airframe. And oftentimes you'll see the airframe will be on fire because they're doing their test because when something happens at the airport, they need to be able to react immediately. When you go to tiny airports, even tiny airports will have a fire truck or some way to combat um, an incident or accident if something happens. Typically, when you hear about accident or incident, accident is typically when someone dies, and incident is usually when no one dies. I think that's usually the information. But uh, the only thing I can tell you is the pilots are very, very skilled. No one walks into that cockpit if they're not qualified. There's a system in place to make sure that only qualified pilots walk through the cockpit door. I know there are movies that talk about Catch Me If You Can, which is about a pilot that kind of faked his way through the whole thing, but the system is a lot different now. If when you go to the gates, you will see that the pilots get scanned in, and the flight attendants also get scanned in. So the people that get on the plane are only the people that are supposed to be there as your trusted flight crew. Uh, it's like I said, it's very complex. The air traffic control, you may not know this, but I was actually thinking about being in air traffic control at one point. But I didn't go that route. A friend of mine actually did, and I'm probably going to have him on and tell him talk about air traffic control. But it's a huge system, and there are lots of different parts to it. And one of the things is that as soon as something happens, you hear people using the air traffic control. Like this last incident that happened was a private pilot came across the runway while a Southwest airplane was landing. And so the airplane, a Southwest pilot, executed what's called a go around or a missed approach. And the airplane is set up for that. Typically, they have buttons and switches in the cockpit that will take care of that. So the airplane will go from a landing configuration to a takeoff configuration. The engines will spool up. That means they'll increase power and they will get out of there. I've actually been in four such situations, and it is amazing to see how the airplane reacts under those situations. And typically, it's if somebody lands on the runway and they haven't cleared the runway properly, or if someone comes onto the runway before, when they weren't supposed to, and oftentimes you can escape it. In Japan, they weren't able to, and the airplane, I think it was the A350, um, ended up crashing at the end of, I think, at the one of the parts of the runway. Um, And luckily, people were able to escape because the crew, when you walk past that crew, say hello because they're saying hello. That's only a part of their job to welcome you on board. But their primary job, and you hear them say it all the time, but you don't care, right? But their primary job is your safety. As a traveler, you can read that that safety card that's in front of you. It's in every seat. It's a requirement that every seat has one, and you should read it. When the flight attendant is giving their demo, don't be an idiot and sit there. You have your headphones on because that's so important for you to do at that moment. Say the things are like 45 minutes, if that long. Just listen. All they're telling you is how to get out of the plane, where your exits are, what you should do in case of an emergency. Because sometimes that same flight attendant that's there to help you may be incapacitated, and you probably have to help them. I.e., if you're at the exit door, you're gonna have to get the exit door out. I've seen them take people off of the plane because this one lady, she was being such an idiot. They were asking her, "Are you willing and able to assist?" And she wouldn't answer, and made a big scene and they kicked her off the plane. People just don't get it. When you're in an accident, it is not nice and rosy. The airplane is not always fully lit. There'll be things, stuff would have broken, so things would have fallen down. You might not be able to get out of your seat properly. In this case, the aircraft was upside down. And so if you didn't have your seatbelt on, you'd have gone flying, literally. And so just listen. That's your job as somebody who flies on an airplane is to listen to the crew. And I've been on an aircraft where we had to go through the emergency drill. Luckily, we landed safely. But it is extremely stressful, and it makes you start thinking about all kinds of things. Because I was like, my they say your life flashed before your eyes, and that's what happened. And so people just don't. We don't think about it until something happens, and then all we hear is thoughts and prayers. And for God's sake, leave your carry-on behind. But why is it so important that you get your carry-on off? Now, one of the things you need to remember is uh, things that can fit in your pocket, put them in your pocket. Um, because you may not have a chance. I know when we were on that flight and we were landing, um, we had time because it was a nose gear, wasn't showing up as locked. It showed that it was down, but it indicated I said it's locked, didn't show up. And so we had time. And so we were able to go. It was winter, so we had to go get our jackets, put all our jackets on. They showed us a brace position. It was on an Air France flight, and we were prepared. and it showed us what to do for the brace. And luckily, we landed and everything was okay. And we saw like fire trucks and stuff outside. And then after we get off the plane, they were like, "Well, do you need to go to the hospital for therapy or anything like that?" But we were fine, so we just continued our journey. But the crew was ready. They were willing and they're able to assist. So when the crew comes around and says, "Are you ready, willing, and able to assist?" I need a verbal yes. Look them straight in the eye and say yes. And especially if you're sitting in the exit row, you should be paying attention through the entire thing. And I know sometimes, you fly a lot, so you're like, "Oh, I've heard this 10,000 times." Humor them. If somebody comes into your office and they're talking to you, it's bad manners if you don't listen to them. So it's the same kind of thing, right? They're doing this for your safety because you don't know. They're trained, and you're going to get in the way of them trying to get you out. Um, their job is to get you out of a plane within, I think it's within 90 seconds, and get you out safely. Um, and this is what they're trained for. Sometimes that doesn't happen because the airplane is destroyed before that happens. Um, but that's aviation safety for you. So pay attention, be respectful, look around and see if something happens. You might have to help somebody to get out. Maybe there's an older person or something like that that might be behind you or in front of you or something like that. You may have to help that person to get out of the airplane. I have flown 204 airlines and flown countless miles. I've had one aborted takeoff and four missed approaches, like I mentioned. And I've been fortunate, but the crew have always been good. So thank you, crew, because they do an amazing job. Don't be an idiot. If you miss your flight, you miss your flight. There's been many stories of people who missed the flight, was making a stink about it, and the airplane crashed. There's even one story where I think they were making a stink. They missed the flight. The airplane crashed. Everybody died. And then there was another. Then the next day, they or whenever it was, they got to the destination and ended up passing away. I think in a road crash or something like that. So sometimes, and it's your turn. It's your turn. However, this is a very somber episode, but it needs to be said because people are scared of flying. I just want to say that there's a website called Flight Radar 24. If you look at that website, it gives you an idea of how many airplanes are flying at any one time. I just flew from Nadi, Fiji, or Nandi, Fiji to Los Angeles. And it was pretty amazing to look at all the airplanes that are flying by. I mean, you can see them on the flight radar shows it, and you could see that in my case, I was following all the Fijian Airlines flights, and there was one to Dallas, there was one to LA, one to San Francisco, and they were all lined up behind each other. And you could see all the other planes, planes coming from Australia, from New Zealand, from Japan, from Seoul, the Atlantic, the Pacific corridor was full. This happens worldwide. There are typically an airplane landing probably every second worldwide because typically on takeoffs and landing, they're about 3 minutes apart. When you go to the airport to watch planes, and I do that all the time, and you see all the stuff from my videos on my YouTube channel about that. Um, it's a beautiful thing to see the airplanes coming. It's extremely well coordinated. The pilots are well trained, the flight attendants are well trained, the air traffic controllers are well trained, the ground handling personnel are well trained. I'll tell you that the airlines we're just talking about how they do the emergency response. They have teams, and these teams they call go teams typically, and these teams will go as soon as something happens, they will get as close as possible, the closest airport to whatever is happening, and they will set up a triage system. And this is a facility where people can come in and ask questions and things like that. To you, it looks very chaotic because it is, but there's a lot of people behind the scenes who are making sure that everything is okay. They always The other thing that came up in the last few days is the airline offering money, and Delta I think offered $30,000 to these passengers, and there were no fatalities on this particular air trip. I know it's 80 people I think, and there were no fatalities on this particular one. And Delta was offering $30,000, no strings attached. Um, One thing people do not read when you fly is there's something called the contract of carriage. In the contract of carriage for every airline, it tells you what what the liability is. If you get, I think it talks about if you die, what your beneficiaries get and things like that. These are numbers that was created at the, I think it was the Montreal Convention many years ago. And so they come up with an amount that yeah, you get in case you die in an aircraft accident, or I guess that your beneficiaries get. And so those numbers are already out there. And that we live in a very litigious society. And so sometimes you have to file a lawsuit so you can get paid because that's just how the system works. Or you have to request. I don't know how, exactly how the whole thing works. Thankfully, that's not something I've had to do. But there are things in place, and the contract of carriage tells you. I have made videos about the contract of carriage and how it works and why you should read it. And this is one of the reasons why you should read it. Um, it is obviously devastating when there's an accident, um, because I mean, it's a loss of life, and it's a lot of people typically at one point. But being in the industry, you understand that you have a job, and your job is like my job at the time was to make sure that you receive the information about the accidents, the incident, and what to do. Is my flight canceled? Like during the 911 situation, we had to, let people know where the airplanes were they canceled, when we're going to restart operation. Basically, communicate all the information so that you get information that you necessarily need. Problem is that you see a lot of stuff on online, and everybody wants to get clicks, and they have clickbait headlines so that because they want people to click. Just be careful of those. Careful of the experts that you see. Don't listen to that what people have to say because everybody has an opinion, right? Because it's the internet. But they're not experts. They don't know what they're talking about, most of them. And you can't infer things because you do not have all the information. Um, yes, you've seen on an airplane, and or you've seen a video and you think you know what's happening, but you just have one piece of the pie. There are many, 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 many pieces of the pie. And so I hate it whenever something happens, you get all these experts and everybody is trying to get the information out. And I saw one guy was like, yeah, there were some survivors. There was maybe two survivors. There were no survivors. And it's just like correction, correction. Just shut up. Because all you're doing is giving people incorrect information. And remember that there are people behind those people. And what you're doing is giving them false hopes because you don't know what you're saying. So just be quiet. I know it's hard to wait for the report because it takes a while. They normally have a preliminary report within 30 days. Sometimes they can't even pull the black box because they can't find it. Or the cockpit voice recorder, or they just don't have any data. And basically, what they do, they take the airplanes and they put it back together, and they find out, well, what is it that's missing, and is it, is it a tear because of the whatever happened in the incident, or is it an explosion or anything like that? If you watch the video, I think they did a video recently about Lockerbie, Scotland, and that tells you a lot that's been going on. So, um, aviation is very safe. Unfortunately, there are accidents that do occur, but it is the safest mode of transportation. And all I can say is trust the professionals that are flying you around, the air traffic controllers that are behind the scenes that you never ever see. because they are moving the airplanes. When you're asleep on that airplane, they are the term they use is handing off. They're handing off airplanes to different people, um, as you or different sectors is what they call them. Um, as you move around, there's just a lot of technology behind the scene that you do not know of. When something happens, as I said, it's a series of unfortunate events that have happened. But just know that air uh, it is pretty safe. It's much safer than getting in your car. If the captain gets into the airplane and there's a light on, and they can't, that light is not supposed to be on. They don't leave until that light is off, unless it's something they have something called minimum equipment list, which is sometimes the airplane can go with a certain number of things not working properly, but then once it gets over another threshold, then you can't. Be patient because sometimes you'll get so excited when there's a delay. Like there's a maintenance delay, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, my whole world has ended." Well, wouldn't you rather the airlines fix whatever problem it is and something happens later? So, yeah, but I'm rambling right now. Uh, Stay safe out there. Just remember that the industry is one of the safest in the world. Um, and trust your crew and play your part. Don't take stuff. If you have to evacuate an airplane, don't take anything. It doesn't work that way. You just impede in the process. But anyway, this is Kerwin with Travel Talk. Um, Travel safely, and we'll talk soon.